again going to 1 Nephi chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. We're going to come back to the end of chapter 1 in a little bit, but I wanted to get to this while it's fresh on my mind. It says, "And it came to pass that when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in a valley by the side of a river of water. And it came to pass that he built an altar of stones and made an offering unto the Lord and gave thanks unto the Lord our God." So the question here that we're going to answer is, did Joseph Smith predict the discovery of a lost portion of the law of Moses, or is the Book of Mormon just true?
As always, the opinions expressed in this video are my own personal opinions and not that of the church or any of its leaders.
All right, the first thing we're going to look at is a few of the terms. Now, these two verses are rife with potential anachronisms, meaning there was a ton of areas where Joseph Smith could have messed this up. A ton of places where he could have let his surroundings of upstate New York, his upbringing of Western society, his lack of knowledge of Egyptology, of Hebrew, of Jewish culture, all could have been exposed here in these two verses. So the first weird thing that we see is the river of water. Joseph Smith, a farm boy from upstate New York, would not have ever used that term, nor did he ever use that term in any of his writings or speakings that we have on record. He never said river of water. Typically in America, we would say river, and just assume and imply the water part is part of the river. But in Egypt, in the Middle East, especially at that time, a more common occurrence was actually a river of sand. There's a term for it that's actually more common than the term for river of water there. It was Nar Ramal, and that means river of sand in Arabic languages. So it was needed that they use a differentiator of, was it a river of sand or a river of water, because that's how common the use of the term river of sand was, is they had to put that differentiator on it that there actually was a water in the river. So Joseph Smith would not have known that. Nephi felt like that was important to distinguish because the term river of sand was so common among the Hebrew people. Second one, a similar sentence construct, altar of stones. Anytime in English that we show a possessive or descriptive relationship between two nouns, we always put the noun before the descriptor. So even if we were to distinguish river of water, we would call it a water river or a sand river. If we were to call it an altar of stones, we would call it a stone altar or a wood altar or a metal altar. We would not use the term altar of stones. But in ancient Semitic languages, they do the exact opposite, and this is actually perfect translation, word for word, from those Semitic languages. It's perfect Hebrew and terrible English. So if we're going to go off of the premise that Joseph Smith was a genius and wrote this of his own accord, he got the grammar wrong, but then when we view it in light of this is actually a Hebrew text, he got the grammar exactly right. It's called a Hebrewism. And the Hebrewism that this is specifically referring to is called a construct state, and there are dozens of them in the Book of Mormon. Okay, the next thing I want to look at is an altar. Okay, this is another place that Joseph Smith could have gotten this wrong. If he only had a rudimentary understanding of Jewish culture, or even if he had an in-depth understanding of Jewish culture, so in-depth that he understood that the sentence construct of a noun with a descriptor needed to be reversed, he would have known, as did every scholar of his day and of previous ages, that you can't build an altar or a temple and offer sacrifices outside of the temple in Jerusalem. Here we have a red flag that many people raised during the time of Joseph Smith all the way through the 1800s and 1900s. There was no proof or evidence that this was done according to the law of Moses. There's nothing in the law of Moses. In fact, Deuteronomy references the exact opposite, that something like this might be frowned upon depending on how you interpret what Deuteronomy says. So people often said that, if Lehi was truly a man of righteousness who was following the law of Moses, and this is a true story that his son was writing, he would have never built an altar outside of Jerusalem. That would be blasphemy. Well, in 1977, as part of the discovery in Qumran of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a temple scroll was found with details about the temple and other religious practices of the day and the law of Moses specifically. In 1977, it was translated into Hebrew, and it wasn't until 1984 that it was translated into English. And this was what the text said: "You shall not slaughter a clean ox or sheep or goat in all of your towns near to my temple within a distance of 3 days' journey. Nay, but inside my temple you shall slaughter it, making a burnt offering or a peace offering." It wasn't until 1984 that anyone who spoke English realized that this was fine according to the law of Moses, and that it was specifically referenced as a 3-day journey must be made. What did Nephi say? When we had traveled a period of 3 days, he made it absolutely sure that we knew that they had traveled 3 days from Jerusalem at least and away from the temple, and that's when they built the altar. He was referencing this part of the law of Moses right here, that they needed to be 3 days' journey away from the temple in order to make this sacrifice. How would Joseph Smith had possibly known this? This didn't exist in any form, text, oral, history, anything, until 1977. It popped up in Hebrew, and 1984 in English. It wasn't available to anyone. Joseph Smith randomly predicted the right distance from Jerusalem that someone must be to build a temple, and the fact that it could even be done. There's no way that Joseph Smith would have known this rule according to the law of Moses from in upstate New York in the 1820s. All right, Joseph Smith got it all right. He guessed right. He guessed right on the sentence structure. He guessed right on knowing that he needed to identify if it was a river of water, a river of sand. He guessed right on knowing that they needed to be 3 days away from the temple before they built an altar, and that building an altar was okay according to the law of Moses, so long as they were that 3-day journeys away from the temple. He guessed right on all that. But why would Lehi build an altar anyway? Why was that even necessary? If he's such a strict follower of the law of Moses, was he making a sacrifice for sin, which is never mentioned? Well, if we read closer into the law of Moses, we'll see that that is common for an altar to be associated with deliverance. So anytime somebody is fleeing, anytime somebody is running from something, or being delivered from something, or trying to escape something, or seeking asylum, or worried about their safety, they can go to the altar and seek asylum by making a sacrifice of deliverance. So if you read in 1 Kings, it references this from Solomon's enemies. In Exodus, you can see the reference as well. And then if you look at other Book of Mormon sacrifices and mentions of altars, we see Alma doing the same thing as Lehi did, and building an altar and offering a sacrifice for deliverance. So it turns out that when you put the Book of Mormon and the Bible together in your hand, you see that one of the sacrifices made by the ancient Jewish people and the ancient Hebrews was that for deliverance. And this is exactly why Lehi would have built this altar of stones. And notice it is an altar of stones and not hewn stones. If they had cut the altar in any way, if they had made the altar of anything but stone, it would have been against the law of Moses. So another thing that Joseph Smith would have guessed right. And just in these 2 verses, we have 5, 6, 7 different proofs or evidences that there's no way that anyone in the Americas in the early 1800s could have got these verses right without it being an actual document, an actual historic document that was written by people that lived at that time.